Hey folks, David Stewart here. I hope you all are having a great day. Welcome to NewPub Talk. I am here with Jesse White. He's a comic artist and all-around great guy, besides also being a great musician. He's a good singer and really just probably a good guy to know. Very into the same kind of stuff that I'm into, which is the pulps, Robert E. Howard and Michael Moorcock in particular. Today is actually Robert E. Howard's 114th birthday. Unfortunately, he took his life when he was 30 years old. So I can only kind of imagine what a different world we would have had he continued working and continued living past that, what should have been a temporary struggle in his life. What do you think, Jesse?
Absolutely. The thing that marks the Howard canon is that it was so prolific. He wrote Conan, and I think on his birthday, we really need to set this straight. His name's not Conan, it's Conan. Yeah. It's absolutely Conan, based on, the Irish pronunciation. And his girlfriend at the time, Novelyn Price, said in the 90s that she'd never heard of who this Conan character was. And she said, Bob always called him Conan. So his name's Conan. But aside from Conan, Bob Howard wrote so many different characters, and he was so prolific in that short time. So had he lived this long, I don't know what he could have possibly created. It would have been monumental. I don't think anybody would have written as much as he had.
Yeah, and I think also, there was, for the amount of time that he worked, which was really less than 10 years, he produced a huge amount of things, a lot of world building. I mean, his Hyborian world has survived his death and been its own franchise across multiple kinds of media. It's really quite fantastic to look at what he actually created. So one of the things that I have here is this is the Cole Exile of Atlantis collection. Now, I hadn't read a lot of these stories. I got this one recently. I also shared with Jesse who put this out. Ballantine has put out a couple of these. They're just the Robert E. Howard stories, no pastiche stuff, no re-editing things later to make them more complete feeling or anything like that. It's just Robert E. Howard's words as they were, including errors from things that weren't published. So things that might have been caught by an editor. There's a couple of odd sentences here and there, but it's really astounding how good the writing really holds up. Cole is another one I'd recommend. This one tends to be overlooked in favor of Conan just because Conan is such a huge character. Cole also has had some films about him. I'm trying to remember. There was one called Cole the Conqueror, and it had the guy who played Kevin. Yeah. So it had Kevin in it. I watched it, and it's not bad for a B movie. You have to remember that, B movie standards need to be a little bit different. The main problem, and this is a weird problem with film, the problem is always the writing, which is actually the cheapest part of making a movie. So when they make a $200 million movie, they pay the screenwriter like $30,000. He's like a tiny, almost insignificant part of the process. But then they will pay a bunch of different screen doctors to doctor it into oblivion, and you end up with kind of just a gray mishmash. It's not that bad for a B movie. It's pretty fun. It was originally going to be a Conan the Barbarian movie, but Kevin Sorbo didn't want to play. He didn't want to follow up Arnold. He wanted to be a different character, and so they did Cole, and it's actually the last Cole story that Robert E. Howard wrote, and it's called By This Axe I Rule, and it became the first Conan story. And so he just kind of adapted it and kind of replaced this more brooding and different kind of character, very reminiscent, kind of a proto-Conan. Adapted it into the more action-oriented, aggressive Conan that we know today. And it's kind of interesting how that happened. So I do really recommend this one. This is a really cool one to look at as well. Already when he was young, he was doing huge world building developments, and the world building that he could pull off in, say, a 5,000 or 10,000 word story is really worth paying attention to. He was excellent at it, and he could do it all indirectly. The characters talked completely naturally, and yet you got this feeling of this massive ancient world that had details to it that mattered. There was so much to his world building writing. If he had lived another 40 years, who knows what we would have seen.
You know, what I really like about his Hyborian setting is, if you're a fan of ancient history, as I know you are, and many of your viewers probably are too, you can trace so much legitimate Earth history that he sort of co-opted into his mishmash proto-Earth history, because Hyboria is supposed to be before the cataclysm that sunk Atlantis. So there's these antecedents that are sort of the same as later Earth civilizations. And what I really like about Howard's setting is that it's actually got anachronisms in it. Like, you could see parts of it where, like in, say, Zingara, which is his sort of parallel to the Iberian coast in Spain, there's basically buccaneering and piracy. That's from the 16th.
There's like Conan pirate stories.
Yeah.
Like
and then there's the other settings where you could go to places which would be like Rome. And there was no part of Earth history where pirates and Rome were together, but in Hyboria you can have that. Yeah. And I think that's very exciting. It's like he picked his favorite parts of Earth history and put them all together in a world where you could sort of travel through it. And you can really see each of the settings and the countries are like future civilizations. And there's names that are distinctly drawn from history. And it said that Howard actually had spent so much time in the Cross Plains Library that he'd read every book that was history-based in the entire library. That was probably a bit of a long, sort of a phony story, but it shows how much he was interested in scholarship.
Yeah, he was, and he really put a lot of effort and time into what he was writing. He also used to go out and enact the action scenes in order to get a feel for how things would actually be done. So him and his friends would go out and fight with spears, so he could have some kind of idea. Because you don't really fight with spears. It's a thing you don't, unless you're me and you have a 4-year-old with a spear and he wants to fight you with it all the time. But otherwise, we don't really get to fight with spears and get the feeling of what that combat's like. So he used to do a lot of stuff like that. I mean, I think maybe it'd be one of these things where we already talk about Conan so much, but we would probably talk about Robert E. Howard maybe more than Tolkien, because I think that contribution could have continued kind of rolling down the lane. It's kind of the same thing with his friend H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, H.P. Lovecraft died fairly early, and who knows what. And he was mostly not successful when he was alive, and it's only afterwards that he's become very popular and loved, and also hated. I don't know if you've kept up with some of the drama lately with Lovecraft, where it's like people coming out with Lovecraft RPGs, and then in the beginning of the book trying to crap on him. It's ridiculous. It's like, we hate this guy, but we're going to totally use his name and work in order to hawk our garbage. Got to pass on that kind of stuff. It's so disrespectful. It's okay if you don't like his personal views or something like that. You should just focus on the work. But they don't even do that. They start trying to like tear down, say, Shadow over Innsmouth or something like that, which I've actually talked about how his portrayal of race and immigrants and religion is actually more subtle than what people give it credit for. You notice that the people who always survive are Catholic. If you're a Catholic immigrant, that's how you survive the story, and it's because he looked at the, he kind of portrayed them as these bumpkins, but at the same time, they were the people who really feared and understood the darkness, and these rational main characters didn't really understand or fear what they were supposed to understand or fear. They didn't approach things with caution because they didn't have faith. And it's kind of an interesting way that I don't know what that was reflecting off. I don't know what part of his psyche that was reflecting that on, but this problem, I guess the theme of problem with being this hyper-rational person and realizing that like there's horrors beyond that. It's like almost post-Christian horror is what you might call his cosmic horror ideas.
That's an interesting idea. That's really deep. Did you know that both of them, although they never personally met, they were correspondents through
they were pen pals. Yeah,
pen pals, and both of them tipped their hats to one another in terms of including elements from the other's mythology into their own writing. And
absolutely.
Howard's story, The Veil of Lost Women, it's a fragmentary story, but it might actually be finished without editing, but it's got a full-on elder god, sort of outer space creature in it. And I think that Lovecraft's material has references to Thoth Amon in it, in the Serpent Wing. He references that character. So the two of them were basically, I don't know, giving literary nods to one another.
Yeah. Now, see, there's a story that I read the other day called The Shadow Kingdom. I actually hadn't read it before, but this is actually one of the things in it is that the rulers of this ancient kingdom are actually these reptilian creatures, like the ones from the Lost City. And so as Cole kills his, I don't know if you guys could see that super well, but as Cole kills his captors, they become these serpent men type of things, and that ends up becoming part of some other mythologies that just get incorporated into it. But it felt very Lovecraftian. It's like this wasn't always ruled by men. There's older gods than these. Is some of those themes, and like the early Cole stuff and early Conan stuff as well. Yeah. So it's great. I like that a lot. Now, this is not just Robert E. Howard. We also wanted to talk about Elric. So it's Conan versus Elric. So Elric is one of my personal favorite heroes, and Michael Moorcock is still alive and still producing books, and still extremely ornery and angry about things. He has a real attitude still. So here's what I like about Elric, and this is my thesis on comparing Elric to Conan. Elric is in many ways an inversion of Conan's nature and Conan's heroicism. Yeah. Conan is very physically robust and strong. Yeah. Elric is very physically weak. Conan, the sword is merely a tool for Conan. That's kind of one of the themes of the movie too, is that the secret of steel is not the sword, but the warrior who wields it. Yeah. And so Conan is this ultra masculine, physically robust warrior. Elric's very weak, and his sword is his master. So he is, in essence, worthless without his weapon. Where Conan is usually portrayed as being very, tanned or olive-skinned with dark hair, a heavy brow ridge, and kind of brooding, scowling, menacing face. Elric, however, is an albino. He's the opposite of that. He's very pale. He has red eyes. He's gracile or just much less human, I guess, than Conan in a way, too, because Moorcock doesn't go too deep into all the physical characteristics of a Melnibonéan, except to say that they're not really human. Yeah. But he's like a physical inversion of Conan. And then Conan is extremely brave and not... Conan's not stupid or anything, but he doesn't have this brooding inner self-dialogue where he doubts himself and wonders what his quest is. Conan is actualizing his own will at all times. Elric is the opposite. Elric is wondering, what is my will? Is this sword my will? Must I do the bidding of the chaos gods? He's constantly warring against other beings that want him to do things and not really knowing what he wants to do himself. He's like he's like a really cool inversion of Conan. Yeah. And that's really where I think classic anti-heroes come from. Conan is the hero. Elric is the anti-hero. What do you think?
I think that's brilliant, and it's right on the mark. And there's one other element I think you could add to it, is that Elric is the pawn of the gods. He is constantly playing out the will, and at the very end, he has to blow the horn of law to bring them in. Yeah. He's merging with them, and he communicates with them all the time. And Conan swears by his god, but he only has one line regarding theology within the whole breadth of the Howard cycle, and he basically says, I think a man is too much of a fool to spend his time thinking about a god, but he's also a fool if he ignores them. That's all he ever says about religion. Yeah. And so Conan is basically going to just use his power of his manliness, and I always essentially call Conan the essential man. It's Howard's version of what is a pure man. He's full of action. He doesn't deliberate over things. He chooses what he's going to do, and he does it straightly. He's not a liar. He's not particularly good. I mean, he will rob you if he was better, but he's also not sort of working to destroy anything. He's just trying to better himself, kind of almost like an extreme individualist.
Yeah, I think that's a great characteristic of Conan. Conan to me represents all of the masculine traits that I think are just essential to the quality of being masculine. He's self-willed. So self-will is a big one. And this is I think where Elric is such a tragic figure, is that Elric at the beginning, if you read Elric of Melniboné, the very first book, Elric is constantly pondering over these morals of these humans in the Young Kingdoms, and walks away from his throne to try to go discover meaning. Conan has no dialogue about what meaning is. Meaning is whatever he assigns to it in the moment. It's his will it's his will to power. He's almost Nietzsche and Ubermensch, you know. He's an ultimate man. He has this
to get gold. That's what his goal is.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I liked about the movie. And the movie is not, completely true to Howard, like, Conan wouldn't be a slave, because Conan is always his own freedom, always his own will. That's part of who he is. But, where he says, his prayer to Crom is like, I never prayed to you before. Yeah. And he says, no, and not even you will remember if we were good men or bad. And he says, so grant me revenge, and if you don't, then to hell with you.
Yeah.
Then I don't care about you. I will do this. I will do this whether you care or not. It doesn't matter whether you remember me. It doesn't matter what you think.
Howard Files hate that movie, but I don't hate it. I wouldn't call myself a Howard File. I'm very particular to him, but I think what John Milius in that film did is he did the same thing that they did in the first X-Men movies. They took a grasp that was wide, and they took everything that was Conan and they made it into this thing, and they sort of put it back to you, and it took the spirit of Conan and made it into a story. And I think he lifted tons of sequences from various Howard stories, but he made a new story, and I thought it was pure, just right in the heart of Conan. I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, I thought it felt like Conan more than probably a lot of pastiche kind of post-edit, when I'm talking about like the Elsbrag de Camp stuff, which is great. I don't dislike it, but it doesn't always feel, I don't know, there's this primal feeling you get when you read these older stories that it's just very hard to communicate exactly how it makes you feel. It just makes you feel excited to read and to learn more about the world. And it's kind of interesting. So in the way that Conan is this Ubermensch, Cole is kind of a different kind of hero. He's very inward focused. He's brooding. He's more like when we first meet him, he's already king, essentially. He's from Atlantis, and he's a barbarian like Conan would be. But he's always considered with thought. He's subject to betrayal. He's just a much more introspective kind of character, and that. When Howard got the story By This Axe I Rule rejected, he rewrote it with Conan because Conan was very direct, and that's kind of where the pulps were going. That's what readers really wanted, is they wanted these super masculine characters that just kind of were go-getters. They went out and did it, it's very hard to resist how appealing that is to have a very satisfying masculine character.
Yeah, I would say that. And in Elric, it's another kind of satisfying. I read Elric right at the right moment. I was probably 17 or 18, and it was right in the heart of my romantic phase of life, and I was really feeling like, the romantic poets were the greatest thing around. And when I read Elric and saw those paintings, it looked to me like all of the tragedy of, Shakespearean lost, hopes and dreams. And I thought, he had this great quality that is basically anti-Conan, but he also kicks butt, man. He goes on to those adventures, he kicks butt. Like when Elric fights those monsters in it, and I mean, nobody comes up with weirder monsters than Moorcock. Those are right out of the bizarre counterculture 70s and the 60s. They're just bizarre. Like, do you remember the part with the flying sharks and stuff like that, and the weird long-legged bird things that throw discs made of obsidian? It was like monsters.
Yeah, he came up with that, and he did that with lots of his settings too. So another one I like is Hawkmoon. Hawkmoon is more of a.
I've never read Hawkmoon.
Hawkmoon's great. So Hawkmoon, the titular character, he's more heroic. He's more like a classic hero. But of course, he comes from a brooding background, so he's kind of a mix between. He's more like Cole. So if you like Cole, I think Hawkmoon is very much like Cole. He's a rebel against this alternate universe Britain that is this evil empire that has a bridge from Great Britain over into France where they rule all of Europe. But it's an alternate Europe. It's very interesting. And they come up with this scheme to control him, to bring these other rebels under control, and he grows into this very heroic character out of that. It's a great, the first book in particular is really good. It's a great, extremely fast-paced heroic tale, very worthy of the pulps. It's great. So yeah, I like Elric as this inversion of Conan. Another thing I like, so I think you and I both have a fondness for the Fortress of the Pearl.
Oh, I love it. It's my favorite Elric story.
Yeah, I think Fortress of the Pearl is definitely my favorite too. And in it, I think more than the original stories, I think we get a really complete look at who Elric is. Because Elric in the earlier stories, remember, he wrote a lot of these, if you buy a book, a lot of cases it's 4 novellas that he published separately, just kind of smushed into one volume. So we get a full-length novel with Fortress of the Pearl, and it's great. My favorite part is when Elric. So I don't want to give spoilers, but it's so hard to not give spoilers. So Elric basically takes Stormbringer into the city and kills every last part of the nobility. He kills everyone, and it's just like that made me that made me have actual affection for Elric rather than just interest in him. He wasn't just an interesting kind of anti-hero. It's like, I like Elric. I want him to be successful. I want him to survive. I want him to be great because he has this it's a quest for justice. And that's a way that you could get a character. That's why people love superheroes, is they always have a quest for justice. And even if it's a superhero that's like the Punisher, who's really an anti-hero, the fact that he's out for justice makes you appreciate those acts of violence because they're in pursuit of justice. So when he goes out there and steals the souls of every person who wronged him, it was just like, yes. It was just such a great...
Stormbringer. Maybe they don't know what Elric's sword is.
Yeah.
The sword called Stormbringer. It's a black sword, and it's basically covered with runes, and it has a twin. Its twin is called Mournblade, and this sword is basically the method that Elric is able to continue to exist with, because it takes essence, souls, from the people it kills and gives that energy to Elric. Elric would be essentially enfeebled without these herbs that he uses to keep himself alive prior to his gaining of this black sword. But once he gets the black sword, it becomes kind of a symbiotic relationship. Like, he can't let go of it. But he hates it because it constantly has its own will, and it asserts its will against him. Although it's a little bit weaker at the beginning to him, it has a will of its own. And when Elric faces off against his own weapon, the story really turned into something that's really, really interesting. In all of, heroic fantasy, there isn't such a relationship between a sword and a wielder that I can think of between Elric and Stormbringer. Do you think of any other, David?
Oh, I can't think of any, certainly none that really come to mind. But what I love about Stormbringer is that, in a way, so Elric is set up so that he has this deficient blood, and he needs these drugs to survive. And it's basically, I don't know if it's Moorclock's reflection on addiction or something else like that, some deeper theme, but it works. And so he's got to have these drugs to live, and once he has Stormbringer becomes this necessity. He hates it, but he needs it. It is like a drug to him, and you could kind of see that with maybe coming out of the 60s. I know Michael Moorcock might have had alcohol problems at various times in his life, as some people have had. So it really gets to the core of that, this thing that, like, it gives you the power that you need, but it comes at a great cost. And what I love about the books is the Stormbringer always exacts its cost upon Elric in ways that are tragic and torturous. So one of my favorites is when they go to that lost city. I'm trying to remember which book this is in. They go across the steaming sea with Count Smeargan. Yeah. And they get there, and he's going to destroy this statue to
Yeah.
to free the Ancient One, and in order to do it, Stormbringer has to have power, and so Stormbringer, against his will, thrusts itself into his friend's chest and steals his soul to have the power to do what Elric wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it's just a horrible thing for Elric to endure. That in order to do what he had to do, he had to sacrifice a friend against his will.
It's a punishing read, I would say. I don't know. Is this supposed to be spoiler free or anything? But
I don't think so. But here we go. So I'm going to share a screen. Hopefully you can see it on yours, right? So this is from this is Conan number 14. This is Conan versus Elric, the coming of Elric. And so this is where we finally meet Elric. And you can see how they use what I call expositional dialogue to describe exactly what's going on. And this is important because a lot of people haven't read Moorcock at this point.
Yeah, we should say Moorcock wrote this story. Roy Thomas is the writer. He actually wrote the dialogue
writer.
But Moorcock wrote this story. They actually contacted him in England because he was young at this time. And this is 1972. And they said, hey, do you want to do this? And he did it. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's great. And it makes sense. It actually fits with his multiverse. So the way that Moorcock envisioned all of his works is they're all things are different iterations of the various worlds that law and chaos are fighting over. They're always struggling against. So our world is one. He has alternate versions of Europe, like with Hawkmoon. There's even, I haven't read it, there's even one where Elric is in like Nazi Germany or something. There's and then there's Sailor on the Seas of Fate, of course. It's Elric and all the other champions, eternal champions, coming together to destroy these indescribable wizards that aren't actually wizards. They're some kind of elder god beings that are beyond comprehension. That they like go inside and like they attack like a pool of stuff, and that kills. It's so far out there. I just can't even describe it. You have to read it.
They don't understand that every one of his heroes is the same being. He's just in a different dimension. And in this particular novel, you can actually read, say, the Corum cycle, and you'll find the Vanishing Tower version in Corum. Mm-hmm. Vanishing Tower is a story of Elric, but you can get it from Elric's point of view when you read the Elric saga. But when you read Corum, where Corum joins him, that still happens. It just comes from Corum's point of view. And I think he must have been crazy or taken some serious drugs to come up with this idea that all of these men are the same man. And he's called the Eternal Champion. And in this particular novel, it's kind of like the keystone of all these characters. And they all meet and have this one adventure together. And I think they actually, to defeat it, they have to all merge together. I can't remember. Is that what happens, David?
Yeah, I think they all merged. It's been a while since I read it, but they all end up merging together to destroy this wizard, and then they each leave the boat. And as they leave the boat, they begin to forget.
Yeah.
And it becomes like a dream. It's like a dream they can't quite remember. And I love that the way he described it. I've actually used some different parallels with that, like in Voices of the Void. When he alters time, so when he gets a vision of the future and then he acts to alter that future, so he sees a vision of the future where he dies, he does something and so he doesn't die, and then his memory of the future becomes like some kind of dream. It fades away and is semi-real. It's not a real memory anymore. It's like kind of a half-remembered dream. That's kind of the paradox there. So it's because they've actually left their normal times at that point and gone to like another dimension in another time. And then of course there's Elric at the end of time, his end of time setting. It's just really brilliant. And for all of Moorcock's craziness, he still does really good world building. It's very good. So anyway, here it is in the comic. This is where they finally meet up. Elric of Melniboné I am, and I await no man's leave. It's like, Melniboné, then surely you were sent by the one called Ziambarg to mete out the vengeance promised by the hooded ones. By Crom, Conan, no! Stand aside, wild mane, and let me pass, or I'll carve you as a feast for your own barbarous gods. Again, this talk of gods. I'll send you howling to those you serve. Blasphemy! No mortal man can vanquish Elric, nor blade of steel survive the onslaught of my own Stormbringer.
There it is.
And there's something about old comics, by the way, with the lettering, the bold lettering, that it's just there's just something about it that works to have that bold lettering.
I totally copy that kind of sticking bold letters up every so often. I think it's awesome.
I'm trying to remember how they did it. They just had like a different size pen, and so they'd pull out the bold pen and they'd write it. I remember they used to hand letter this stuff. All this stuff is hand lettered. You know, nowadays not so much. I think you lose something if you have just a font instead of the actual hand lettering. Actual hand lettering is a little better. This is actually a photograph of Jesse's Conan comic.
Yeah,
that he sent me.
Here, I happen to have the entire run of Conan. I don't know if I've ever told you guys this. I have all of them, and this is 14 and 15. I took photos of it so David could show them, but I paid quite a bit of money for these over the years. And
here, can you show them again? I didn't have you on screen. It was me and your voice.
Right, here is.
We'll get to chat in just a second, guys.
This is the one that we're reading right now.
Yeah.
Coming to Elric. And this is 15 here.
Which is the part 2.
Part 2. Drawn by Barry Smith. Written by Roy Thomas.
Yeah. Yeah, I call this Small Nose Conan.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of this one personally, but I also don't like the dunce cap they put on Elric. I don't know what that's for, but I was reading in Roy Thomas's book called A Barbarian Life. It's where he's sort of reviewing all of the issues of Conan that he wrote on, sort of retrospectively, and he said that he and Barry just did this dunce cap hat because it had appeared on the cover of one of the newer Elric novels. Yeah. And they just went with it. I think it looks asinine, in fact. Do you like it?
I don't like it. So I don't know why he's wearing an elf cap. And that makes sense to me. I thought they maybe there's like an elven description of Elric, and so they gave him what constituted an elf cap at the time, like Santa. He looks like Santa's little helper, you know. Yeah. I never quite how I envisioned him. Something else about the art in this, all the noses feel a little small.
Yeah, and the faces are too long, and well, Barry's got his quality.
Style.
Yeah, I think that the story of Barry Smith is an interesting one. I'm working on this epic long video. I don't know. It's so hard to make videos for me. I have to edit myself down, but I know so much about Barry and his process from studying this, and I think that maybe I should reserve it for that video. But one of the things that's most notable about him is that he was trying to be like Jack Kirby when he started. That's what he was copying, the Kirby style. And I think that the issue with Barry Smith is that it's part of this thing that you and I have talked many times, David, about the noodling. Barry is a noodler, and he does this really Baroque detail on things. And in fact, he actually actively talked about how he liked the pre-Raphaelites and stuff. And what ended up happening is Conan wasn't selling well. It was really, really not doing so well. It would go up a bit and go down, and it was bi-monthly. It was like 2 times. It took 2 months for one to come out, and Barry just started getting further and further behind because he was putting all this minuscule detail into these things, right? Mm-hmm. And they had hired Barry because they couldn't pay John Buscema. John Buscema was the highest paid artist in Marvel at the time, and this book, without having any effort or any sort of backlog of whether or not it was going to succeed, they couldn't justify putting John's price on it. And Barry was just, according to Stan Lee, willing to work for food stamps. So they put him on this job, and he really made his name with it. But the book really took off when John took over. I mean,
I like John's redesign quite a bit better.
Yeah,
and there's actually a lot of dynamic quality to these action scenes. There's some great action there. He actually has some great, very emotional poses for the characters. It's not like a deficient it's not really deficient. It's just not my favorite iteration. It like that, something about the small nose and the kind of flat face. I don't know. It makes him look. There's something off about him. Whereas I think John copied. His kind of seemed like an iteration of Franzetta, where it's that heavy brow ridge, the bigger, more square face, and then of course his anatomy is more. I mean, you can look at just looking at this little splash of Conan here, where his legs are smooth, whereas John Buscema, you'd see every muscle would be perfectly aligned. And again, like the noodling here, it's like, this is, I guess, the bottom of the rib cage. I guess these are abs. If John would have done it, it would have been like crisply anatomically correct.
Yeah.
You know?
And John said over and over again, I mean, he doesn't say much about Barry. Well, John's gone now, but he didn't say much about Barry at all because he's a professional. And he just basically said, I disagreed with the way that they've characterized him. He looked like a teenager. I thought he was a big man. I took information from the books. And he also said, I didn't like the way that he set the world. He said he thought that the world, according to this, the way that it appeared in these first issues, was that it was too late medieval. He said, I thought that the world would be more prehistoric looking than that.
Yeah, more primitive. Yeah. And Conan is very primitive. That's why, that's also one of the feelings I get from reading the Robert E. Howard stories. Something about that Hyborian age, it feels out of time, but it always feels prehistoric. Very, very often characters have stone weapons. And there's this extreme contrast between a very, say, primitive barbarian tribe that is using stone weapons and the Velusians, for example, that have who knows how long their history goes back to these reptilian creatures. They could be 100,000 years. Ancient mansions and great steel weapons. This big contrast between the completely savage and untamed and unsettled, and that which is ancient.
One of the big themes that Howard always goes back to is this idea of the primitive man being more essential and more correct. He's very critical of modernity as far as he knew it in the time he was living in, and he hated the idea of kind of bureaucracy, and he hated the way that civilized men sort of did things in a sort of a half-assed way. And in one of the videos I did on my channel where I analyzed the God in the Bowl, you really see this really clearly. It's like Conan is the essential man waiting for this thing to happen, and there's all of these other characters that are like investigators, and they're police prefects. They're trying to solve what the mystery is and what's happening, and all of it falls apart because once they face this primal horror of this monster, they don't know what to do. The civilized man dissembles, and that's when the barbarian takes his moment, and he comes in like a thunderstorm, and it's like an epic proportion where these two titanic beings, Conan the primeval man and this elder beast that's lived from time immemorial, when they clash, it's like that's the stuff of legend. And Howard was really trying hard in all of his stories to show that barbarism was kind of, as far as he was concerned, the essential state of proper manliness. He was a very big critic of civilization. And
that's so we've talked about, you and I have talked about the transition from the romantic and post-romantic into the modern and the reactions against it. So to me, all of the pulps, Robert E. Howard, H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Rice Burroughs, they are the continuation of the post-romantic to me.
Yeah.
And the idea of the noble savage is rooted in romanticism, this idea that there's a primal self, there's a primal manhood, there's a primal humanity that is lost when we take a man out of the wild and we put him into a little safe little civilization. That's rooted in romanticism. And we also see that with Tolkien. Tolkien had many of the same reactions, just in a different way.
In a different way, very English way. Yeah, totally different. It's a Texan versus an Englishman.
Yeah, it's absolutely a very different approach, but you have the same themes there, which is that, and you see this also in Cole. Cole is a barbarian who conquers civilization, and it's his help from other barbarians like the Picts and that he's able to maintain control and to best his very kind of, I don't want to say civilized, but thoughtful and planning enemies. What I like about Conan is that he's like a wrecking ball. And so whereas people are, they're worried about negotiation and all these things that are civilized, Conan is the primal savage force that comes in and knocks all that away and shows how pointless it is.
Yeah.
And I see that with Elric too. Elric is another reaction because he's the emperor of this 10,000-year-old kingdom of Melniboné that used to rule the world but has since fallen into decadence and evil. And it really is very evil. And he looks up, he sits upon the ruby throne and broods about how corrupt and worthless his people are. And decides to go venture out into the young kingdoms amongst these human savages to learn what is morality and what is meaning, and everybody mocks him for having these thoughts. Yeah. So what Elric is, he's the civilized weak, and of course he's physically weak. It's a great example of a civilized man. He's physically weak. He's wicked in some ways. He doesn't understand philosophy, but wants to. The modern man now is very divorced from the philosophical ideas of his forebears.
That's what is Moonglum. Moonglum is the earthy sort of jokester where, say Elric is brooding and he's serious. Moonglum is lighthearted and he's his perfect yin-yang opposite, and that's why he's fulfilled when he meets him. And I like that this idea that Moorcock was working on. It's strong in the story Corum as well, that the young kingdoms, the humans that are developing, it always seemed to me like it was like the British Isles and the United States, that these young kingdoms down here, we're not so sure what they are, they're uncouth. That would be the United States compared to the Great Britain, and they're sitting there on their throne, but the young kingdoms are turning into something. Yes. And soon they're going to take you over. And Elric's the only one that's even marginally interested in the young kingdoms. The Amurians are just like, they don't care. They'd rather sit there, drink their drinks and smoke opium or whatever they did on their isle. And that's England. Like, that's what I always thought that what the idea was. It's sort of a royal...
I could definitely see that. And the insular nature of a highly civilized island versus the savagery of the wild, which goes on and makes its own way. I love what Moorcock does as well with this. The chaos. You can read it it's called The Dream of Earl Aubeck.
Yeah,
where he goes to this castle on the edge of chaos and doesn't realize that through his actions he's creating new worlds, he's creating the new lands, and that also signals the end of the old ways, that you create order there's constant order out of chaos, which destroys the old order. You create new order which destroys the old order, which is great. Let's take a slight break and I'm going to read some of the chat. Have you ever seen the 1996 Robert E. Howard biopic The Whole Wide World starring Vincent D'Onofrio?
Oh, I love it. It's such a wonderful show. Renee Zellweger plays Novelyn Price, and she's a real Texan. It's a very, very sensitive and beautiful show. I really recommend it. It's low budget, and it's basically telling the story of his relationship with Novelyn Price. And it was from Novelyn's memoir called The One Who Walked Alone, and it was her reminiscences about her life with Bob Howard. And they sort of almost had a love relationship. I don't know if it was ever consummated, but they certainly dated each other. And it just didn't seem to work out properly because Bob was a hard man to deal with, and he had his own issues with his family and his sick mother. And Novelyn was a go-getter. And one of my favorite parts, David, I think you'll like this if you haven't seen the movie. He's talking with her, and Novelyn first approaches Bob because she wants to learn about writing. He's a successful writer during the Depression. Like this is serious, in small town Cross Plains, Texas. So Novelyn, who wants to be a writer, comes to meet Bob because he's like a kind of a hero of the town, and she's a school teacher, and they're talking in the cafe, and he decides to meet with her, and she says, "Well, I've been listening to people speaking in the cafe, and I copied down what they said, and I used that for my dialogue." And Bob looks at her and he goes, "What?" She said, "I listened to what they said, and I use it for my dialogue." And he goes, "Ha! That's not writing. That's copying." That's tremendous.
I guess there was also a Solomon Kane movie starring James Purefoy.
True.
I haven't seen it.
It's quite good, actually.
Solomon Kane's also great. That's going to have to be a topic for some other time. I love Solomon Kane, and actually, the little crucifixion book that will hopefully be coming out this year is kind of like Solomon Kane but Space Paladin.
Yeah, fun. Yeah,
that's how I like to think of it. It's Solomon Kane in space is a way to think of it. Not really in space, but kind of planetary. I don't want to say planetary romance, but it kind of is. Anyway, have you ever read Bran Mac Morn?
Yes, of course. Bran Mac Morn is the Pict character, and then this is almost a historical. It's set during the time of Rome's invasion of northern England, and the Picts, of course, are the
and of course the Picts are in Howard's writing as well. The Picts are these
Indians.
They're
quite different. I know they're called Picts, but really not Picts. They're more like Indians.
It's what he uses. Yeah. I don't know. Are they more like Indians? I don't know. I have to think about it.
Read the Beyond the Black River. That's a full-on frontier Indian story, but the Picts and Bran Mac Morn is tremendous. The Worms of the Earth is a great story.
All right, let's see what else. Do you and Jesse believe there could be a problem of artists overly detailing to hide their mistakes, or artists overly simplifying their art to not improve on their mistakes? So those are the two extremes. I think, first of all, yes to the first one. I think Jesse's definitely convinced me of this. The more you noodle, the more, there's a threshold where you once you go over that threshold, you're trying to cover. Like if the eyes are slightly off, you just kind of put some lines in there and shadow it up, and maybe people don't notice that the eyes are slightly misaligned. You think so?
Yeah, I totally think so, and I think it's really, really hard to convince someone that's not a drawer of this. I'm glad that you and I have seen eye to eye on this, because a lot of people get really, really enamored by lots of heavy rendering in pictures, but that's kind of like the labor theory of value. Like it's like put a lot of work into it, ergo it's good. I think that's not quite right. It's more like a sonnet, A sonnet is perfect because it's got so few things. Oh, even better, a haiku, haiku. This is even better. So when John draws those lines, he keeps it what he calls open, because he's got them in the exact right place. If you move them even a marginal amount, there would be diminishment, and you would start to feel this is going into the uncanny valley. And this is why it's so hard to draw openly, but to noodle it up, it's quite easy. You just have to spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the difficulty of illustration. Like pen and ink illustration is that you really only have two colors, black and white. You don't have grays. You don't, if you're working with like pencils or charcoal, you can create lots of shades, and you can also erase, which which helps a little bit. But when it comes to pen and ink drawings, the more you noodle, the more it starts to mess things up. I think you could see this with a lot of the '90s comic artists, kind of taking in the vein of like Rob Liefeld. They tend to noodle up the face a lot, and the more lines you put on a face, the older it looks too. And in some cases, it can look quite strange. Some of Rob's mouths tend to look quite, kind of weird. His mouths tend to look a little bit kind of puckered and strange because there's so many lines around them as a result.
The other thing, it doesn't read well in a comic. That's another point that's really essential, because you can noodle it up in a single illustration. Like, say, for instance, like you're looking through Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. Those 19th century drawings of those really, really finely done, etchings, or Gustave Doré, that's full noodling. But because it's one picture, that's not bad. But in a comic, that's hard to look at. There's too much there.
Yeah, I agree. And at the same time, I also think so what's the other side of that is that you're not drawing enough and therefore not improving on your mistakes. I think now I'm gonna maybe this is not what Chameleon here is thinking, but I'm thinking along the lines of, I've seen a lot of artists that are saying the webtoon space, or the web comic space, where they kind of set into a style, and they never really move past that. And in some cases, they regress to a simpler style in order to avoid doing the work of like improving or going forward on what they're doing. So they start using less detail because maybe it's because of work constraints or whatever, but when they're adding the detail, it becomes apparent that they actually need to do a little bit more practice on adding that detail, and so they tend to regress. So you end up with a lot of webcomics where the style is cartoonish mostly because it has to be cartoonish. The artist just doesn't have the background to make a more detailed image, and when they try to do that, it doesn't always come off so great. And at the same time, and this is not bad. If you're an artist that does this is not bad. There's lots of artists that rely more on the color spaces that you can work with in digital rather than those highly defined lines of yesteryear. So the line art, in general, this is also the case in the big two. The line art is often of a lower quality, or just there's less of it than there used to be because the colors do so much more work. What do you think, Jesse?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't hate, if that's what you like, that's fine. I'm not a huge fan of that kind of gradient, highly digitized color space. And actually, I was looking at a friend's comic the other day, and he does a pretty stylized approach. It's kind of cartoony, but his colors are all over the place. Like there's so much color in every picture. It's like you need to just be working in the color space because that's where your strength is. Your strength is in having all these incredibly colorful pictures rather than trying to have some kind of John Buscema style, really highly defined line art style. It's okay if you're not going to do that. It's going to have a more painted look. Is kind of what I call it. Like a painting. You're not working on this slight abstraction of the lines.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I think there's probably some truth to the other side of that. Like you don't pursue enough detail to improve. I don't know. I definitely agree with Jesse, though, that I think if you noodle a lot, it could be there to cover up mistakes. And I think we could kind of see that with this Conan comic. Let me see if I could I'll pull up an example here. Let me screen share so I can see.
Anyone who draw knows this is true. You go, I'll just put some hatching here and it'll fix this problem.
Yeah. So I've done this myself. So like, if we look at this close up of Conan over in the corner, and I'm going to zoom in pretty big here so people at home can really see it clearly.
That shows good.
His eyes are slightly off.
Yeah.
So because of the angle that the face is being drawn at, the eyes are slightly off. Also, there's no left side of the nose. So the nose is at a slightly wrong angle. And so the kind of cover up from that, you see the corner of the eyes just have a bunch of all around it,
Eyelashes or something, I guess. Yeah,
they're not really eyelashes. The eyelashes, it's just just some hatching to kind of cover that up. It's not that bad, but you can see the perspective is not working there. I've seen a lot of bigger artists nowadays have this problem where they choose, you choose to draw a subject at an angle, and it doesn't really happen. You start to distort the face. Whereas, if the face is drawn fairly straight on, it's not too bad. Sometimes or in a profile, it's not too bad. But sometimes if you draw at a strange angle, everything's going to look just a little bit off as far as the placement goes.
David, it keys into that conversation we had about when something gets more towards being realistic, you judge it harder, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
This one is quite far from realistic. Like if you saw that person walking down the street, you'd feel horror.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing to say about it. But like these bloated fat lips and a puny small nose, he would look like a plastic surgery thing gone wrong. But like because it's not realistic, you can sort of go, I get what's going here.
I get the gesture. Yeah, style is about kind of gesture to me. So if you have a style, then the style is about the big gestures, and that's actually why I tend to be more forgiving, I guess, of Rob Liefeld than most people. It's like the giant, bloated, huge dudes are just a gesture towards the extremity, and they really shouldn't be viewed as like something realistic, because they're not. And the artistic deficiencies maybe of Rob's drawing, I guess particularly his early drawing too, just really comes from the fact that he's just pursuing this style and just didn't really care about the technical aspects of it. So you just kind of look at it as like, oh, it's a giant, huge dude with a metal arm. That's Cable, you know. But people loved it. People loved that. People loved seeing a huge arm.
You know what's kind of nice about Barry is this. I like that picture of Gaynor the Damned there. Just zoom over to the right a little, where Gaynor's got the helmet on there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Prince Gaynor the Damned.
Yeah, he's a great character. He features in Corum a lot. Does he feature in Elric? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I think he's a villain from Corum. And what I like about this is I really like that it's got this kind of like, I don't know, unreadable quality, because Gaynor's got this face that when Corum actually lifts it off, it changes constantly, because he's basically being reincarnated 1,000 times because he's damned. And I love that Barry's got this mask that sort of barely shows you his eyes within there. I think that's kind of a cool picture.
Yeah, actually, I like that.
The filigree, nice.
And you know, I do think his action sets are quite nice. Like this horse rearing, this all looks pretty good. You know, these horses they have a very kind of menacing look. You know, he really made them look quite monstrous. But the staging's quite good. You know, there's a lot of good qualities to his art.
Yeah.
Even if I'm nitpicking about this face or that face. You know what I mean?
He's definitely got his fans, and I think that he's not my favorite, but I wouldn't say he's bad or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, like this is I actually really like this panel here with Elric here, and like this pose, and you know the kind of emotion that's on the face, and this kind of grotesque skeleton thing, the hands kind of reaching in through the frame, and it all flows pretty good. Like I do like the way he sets up a panel is actually pretty good. This action panel again, it just looks chaotic, but you can see what's going on. You have a clear idea, I think, also of all the action. And there is a competency here too, where you have an action panel, you have a close up to see the reaction and the emotion on their face, and then you show the action again. This is good cinematography if you were going to shoot this as a movie.
I could learn some things from looking at this a little closer, and it's really good. His draftsmanship might not be the best, but he's got some really good design and some very good action.
You know, yeah, like this action is great, and he also knows how to set up a panel so like the lettering works. So just here, you know, all this negative space. I think you've talked about this. You need to have negative space in your comic panels, if for no other reason than so you can have the dialogue exist.
People don't understand this. I can't figure out how people get themselves into a position where they think that they're a comic artist, and they just ram the picture up with all of this detail, and you just can't put any blurb in there. There's nothing at all.
Yeah, like this has a big negative. The upper third is mostly negative space, and so negative space is something that I need to talk about with book covers too. So a lot of people, when they start designing a book cover image or they hire an artist, they're like, you tell the artist it's going to be a 6x9, and so it's 6x9 of art, and where there's no, so you're going to have to cover up the details with like some of the text. Let me see if I can find a good example actually of one of mine. So Water of Awakening is an image by, the front image is by a guy named Kerem Bayat. He's a Turkish artist.
That's a great picture.
Yeah, he's a great artist too. He's great in the digital space. He did Twilight Forces covers, and he's a great concept artist. You notice that like this is really negative space, even though there's trees up here. It's all blurry. It's a single layer. It's just one color to just kind of give you the idea that there's some forest in the distance. That's a perfect place to place text. And again, it's that kind of 2/3 and 1/3 where there's detail, a central figure, and then there's some negative space. You actually have to have that in art. Otherwise, even in Baroque paintings, there's negative space. You don't want to have too much. You don't want to have like one image and then like nothing. But you do want some negative space, especially with comics. You
know what's really easy to see this in is if anybody out there is a fan of Frank Frazetta, you buy any of his books, his albums, you look at his paintings, were primarily, not primarily, but many of them were done for covers. You'll see these paintings like total empty space on the top, like nothing there at all. This sort of picture of like some awesome action and then just sort of this sky that goes up.
Yeah.
He does it all the time.
Maybe you guys could see this one. This is from another Conan. This is Conan the Usurper.
That's the best pictures.
I love this picture, and I just love the detail of his back. This is like a Mr. Olympia back here. Yeah. But if you look, it's Conan and a snake, and you're actually missing part of the painting. The painting keeps going up into just nothing. But like most of the painting is just negative space over here. Mm-hmm. There's nothing to it. You got to kind of have some breathing room in your art. It's actually important. So with book covers, it's extra important because you need to have text that people can read and not be distracted by some detail it's covering up. And I actually see a lot of big five publishers not understanding this, which kind of makes me think like I don't know what their cover designers are learning in art school or wherever they get their cover, their graphic design degree from, because they're not really thinking about the details.
That's bizarre.
Anyway, Film Girl, sorry I missed the first couple of episodes of the new stream. I was ridiculously ill. I'm sorry you were sick. I had a good Christmas. Did you have a good Christmas, Jesse?
Yeah, it was very nice, restful. My mom came out to visit.
Yeah, so we had a good one. My grandfather actually died about 2 weeks ago at I think just shy of 95. No, he was 95. So he got his last Christmas and got to see the New Year, and he died very peacefully. So that was kind of, I don't know, it's a good thing because it's meaningful, even though it's a very sad thing. So we had a pretty good Christmas despite that, and I'm looking forward to this year. I think it's going to be a fun and busy year. So
me too.
Hopefully everybody had a great holiday. I've seen similar negative attitudes towards Edgar Rice Burroughs. Makes me fear for future circulation of works from there. Oh, I think we're talking about race, which are the foundations of so many genres. Like with Tarzan of the Apes. The idea that, these Edgar Rice Burroughs was writing at the beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah. He's a long time ago. Howard looked back to him as being an old author.
Yeah. So it'd be like reading Sir Walter Scott. I mean, can you imagine modern cancel culture reading like Sir Walter Scott? Yeah. Like reading Ivanhoe and being like, this opening scene features slaves.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it does. Yeah. That's the nature of how people lived.
Well, they've gone against Howard too. His portrayal of the blacks is basically he treats them quite roughly, I suppose. But there's also a kind of a bunch of characters that he creates that are kind of part of Conan's group that are, different races. And I think that it's just a different time, and people get all bent out of shape about this.
Yeah, I agree. But the stories are worth reading, even if you have some kind of difference in sensibility. And I really think it's awful to build on somebody's name when they're dead and can't defend themselves, and also trash on them.
Yeah.
Matt says David Stewart is great, Annie. Thank you. I am great. I am supreme. This year I will be coming out with, I just want to tell everybody who's stuck with me through the right stream, I will be coming out with a productivity book this year. It's called Keys to Prolific Creation, and it's going to have a bunch of information on how to just be really consistent with your process and come out with lots of stuff and improve as well. So that's an important thing. I've been seeing Jesse post on Twitter some of his Draw Like Bushima art. Is that something you do in the morning? Why don't you tell me about that?
Yeah, my goal is always to draw like him, but the kind of pursuit is that I take a picture and I don't know, I work through it, and I go through. That's John himself. That's me there below. Yeah.
There you are. Yeah. Here, let me show people this. Here we go.
And so, for an hour in the morning, I try to make up a picture in the style of John and just do my best John there. And I've studied him for so many years. Some people think that I'm getting pretty close. I feel there's some ways to go, but the other thing is that John could draw anything, and I can't. Like, he could draw cities and he could draw cars. And Roy Thomas said about John Buscema could draw anything that you could convince him that he wanted to draw. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So yeah, he definitely had it there. Although I think he always wanted to be a painter and never really felt like his painting skills were quite up to snuff.
That's true.
And painting and illustration are really different skill sets. I mean, there's still lots of techniques that'll cross, but they really are different skill sets.
Yeah, it's not line work at all in painting. So, yeah, John was very critical of.
This is not a draw like John. This is an actual panel from an upcoming project, isn't it?
That is. Yeah, that's a panel from. That's pencil though. That's not ink yet, but.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's just pencil that, but that's how I pencil.
Pencil dark.
Yeah. Well, I have to do that because I'm dumb, so I can't remember anything when I'm going to ink.
I think it looks good.
Thanks.
Here's another Conan.
Yeah, that's practice like John. Yeah.
So that's good. All right, let's keep going through the chat. See what's there. Having not read the stories, but how close to the source material are the Conan the Barbarian films? They're not that close. They get the spirit, but not the specifics.
Yeah, and they take elements from the stories, and like for instance, there's a DeCamp story. L. Sprague de Camp wrote The Thing in the Crypt. That's sort of like in the movie where Conan finds the Atlantean sword, and there's an ancient king there. They lifted that from a novel. It wasn't a Howard novel, but they're not the same.
Yeah, they're quite different. I recommend the books if you liked the movies and the movies inspire you, especially the first movie. I think you should start with Robert E. Howard's stuff, and then after that you can explore what you want to. You could read the Conan the Barbarian comics or Savage Sword of Conan. Are great, I think, and a lot of the Sprague de Camp stuff is good. I like it. Yeah. I've read it. They're good stories.
Yeah, they are. They're good. There.
But I'd start with Robert E. Howard. He just has a flavor to him that's very inspiring.
I like how he writes big war scenes.
Yeah. I'll have to look closer at those. This is something that people have drawn to my attention. Is I wrote a big war scene. I wrote a couple of them in Needle Ash.
Yeah.
And so people were really liking that, and I was like, I hadn't really thought about looking. I just wrote kind of how I imagined it and with the details I thought were necessary. But like reading Tolkien again, Tolkien's very sparse on battle details. He just doesn't really describe a whole lot of what's actually happening. And very often a hobbit will conveniently bump his head and miss most of the battle. And then you just get to look at the results of the battle, which is what really matters.
Yeah.
Have you seen Kim Gung-ji's artwork? If so, what are your thoughts? Well, I'll Google it. Let's see. Oh my, there's some very elaborate art here. Let's take a look at some of this stuff.
Is he the world's greatest illustrator?
Here, all right, let's take a look. You can see my screen, right?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
All right.
It's very intense.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. I wonder how big a canvas this actually is.
I don't know. It's kind of like the Hieronymus Bosch approach, right?
Yeah, very Baroque. So Hieronymus Bosch, I really like Hieronymus Bosch's art. I really love it. I think it's on the back of one of mine. I think there's a Hieronymus Bosch piece. The Temptations of St. Anthony. He loved drawing very grotesque things with lots and lots and lots of figures. A lot of black metal bands like to use his art because he would draw these depictions of hell that were just bizarre. And I mean, when you consider when he was painting, like, it's like, how did this guy not get in trouble for drawing this stuff? And I did some research on this kind of stuff, and it wasn't bad or anything to draw depictions of hell, because you were drawing the torment that believers should be wary of. And they used to draw demons and horrible things on the outside doors of churches because that was the outside. The outside of the world is full of demons and horrors, and once you step inside the church, you're in the tranquil beauty of God. So that,
the thing at the end, yeah.
Or grotesque gargoyles on the outside of churches. It's like, why is this on the outside of the church? It's because that's on the facing the world. So frightening, having a frightening view of hell was not considered a bad thing.
Yeah.
This is quite an interesting piece.
Yeah, it's very amazing. That guy's definitely really good.
Let's see here.
Oh, it looked pretty big. You see that picture of him there drawing a motorcycle or something?
Yeah. There's a lot going on. Lot going on. There's still some negative space around the edges, but it's pretty filled up. There's a lot of detail here. I'm not even sure what's going on in this picture. There's so much.
Yeah, it's hard for me to look at it. I definitely see the skill there. It's not my kind of thing, but I see the skill for sure. There's great skill. Tremendous
Let's take a look
skill.
at one more. So this is a little bit more focused on the people.
Kind of vignettes, sort of.
Yeah, and there's some kids playing like Dungeons and Dragons or something here.
Yeah.
Playing a tabletop game like from Goonies.
Yeah, it looks like.
And riding bikes.
Just like Stranger Things or something.
Maybe.
The Asian Stranger Things.
Yeah, and some kids in like spacesuits. Very interesting. So yeah, I kind of dig it.
Yeah, it's really good.
Let's keep going through the chat because this is good. While there were many noble savage pulp heroes, there were some pulp heroes who were highly civilized and modern, like Doc Savage. What are your thoughts on that archetype? I think that's fine too. They're emphasizing different things. So the highly civilized man is holding back the carnage of savagery in a sense. Edgar Rice Burroughs used to do this. It's like the savagery, it was the civilized man kind of against savagery. That I guess that contrast is there. I think the modern, so I hate to say that it's modern to look at civilization as necessarily good. Modern really is an attempt to create your own aesthetics and your own things rather than, work on those of the past. But I think that's not a bad thing. It's just a different way of looking at it. I always felt Kane from Legacy of Kain was meant to be more of a modern spin on Elric as a character concept. I don't think I know enough about it to comment.
I don't know what that is either.
Why do so many successful artists in every subject commit suicide?
You mean like people like
like people like Robert E. Howard or Kurt Cobain? I don't know.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm not sure. What do you think, Jesse?
Well, I think there's two approaches to art. And it's kind of like the unconstrained and the constrained, John is the constrained. John did not kill himself, and John worked at Marvel all of his days, and he made a good career out of it. Barry Smith is the unconstrained, and Barry quit after this Elric issue because he couldn't take it. He was working too hard. He felt that Marvel was oppressing him. And then he came back to Conan because he couldn't get any other work, and then he quit again. He's this really rock and roller, like a counterculture guy. So it's the people that are on the unconstrained vision where they really want to feel it. It's like the method actor versus the classical actor. Those people end up topping themselves because the world is too much with them, they can't take it. What they should do is approach it like John, and the way that I try to approach it, like they do it as a technician, like the craft of art. For instance, in the old days before artist as an intellectual came about, like we're talking the medieval, you were a technician, you were an artisan, you did a job, and your trade was painting. This is the approach that became kind of more confused as the Renaissance rose into the modern times of the romantic periods of art. Became the artist is a genius, and that's the unconstrained vision. And I think people like Van Gogh, those people are on the wrong track. That's my.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think artists. So, I think there's this. I don't want to get too woo-woo here, but there's a contrast between the chaotic and the orderly within every artist. It's because you have this swirling dream space that is unharnessed creativity. Like, it's the craziness that inspires you. And so a lot of great artists, they're constantly trying to access that at all times. And when it is too chaotic or they can't access it, they despair. When it's not magically teleported into their brain, they end up in a place of despair. And I know this from knowing many musicians in particular, because music tends to be so almost magical to people who don't have an extreme technical knowledge of music. They tend to think that there's some sort of spirit being causing them to feel the way they feel about music. Or, they play the same song for 10 years and they're like, oh man, I just don't feel it anymore. It's like, well, of course you don't. I feel for a band like Rush, where they would get on stage and they've played Working Man. They played Working Man for 50 years. They played that song like at every concert, And when I saw them play, they played a reggae version of it, which made me think, they're still trying to keep it fun. And they don't take themselves too seriously, which is great about that band.
He goes on stage and sings "Run to the Hills" like it's 1982 still. Like, he goes out there and gives it everything, like it's never changed. And I feel like
it's so hard.
I admire that.
I admire that too. I mean, there's a lot to that, but I think there's a lot of artists who just are always in this chaos state, and they never really get out of it. And I think because they either are rebelling against this idea of being a technical artist. And see, this is some stuff that I'll cover in the new book. The key to having output is being really consistent about your work, just having a routine and sticking to it. And then you find that when you do it, even when you sit down at your routine and you're not feeling it, it just happens anyway, because your mind just goes into that space. You have a warm up, you're practiced at it. So I sit down, I have a transition or warm up before I write, and then it's kind of like I had all these ideas that I'm stressed out about this, and I sit down and about 2 sentences into it, I've just forgotten everything that was outside of that transition, and then you're in the moment and you're feeling creative again. So
that's
I think
exactly how I do it too, David. I mean, I actually have such bizarre methods. I have a schedule, and if I don't follow the schedule, or say I lose the schedule, I don't know even what I'm doing. I don't even know what I'm doing. I wander around. I look at the wall. It's so weird. And
I'm the same way. I'm the exact same way. This is something I'll talk about in the book, is you have to have that. People that don't have that are usually the ones that are like, they never finish a project because they sit down to work randomly. If you're only working when you feel like it, you'll never finish anything.
You'll never finish it.
The trick is to know how to make yourself feel like it.
That's exactly right.
Which is a little weird, but it's what I have the routine every night. I put the kids to bed. I go exercise. Either I go for a run or I go to the gym, depending on how early I've managed to get them to bed. So if I get them to bed earlier, I'll go to the gym. Otherwise, I'll go for a run. And that run is me. I just listen to music, and so it just kind of is a big transition. Come back, I drink a protein shake or have a little meal, and I sit down to write. I take care of a couple technical things, like couple tasks, whatever I need to do, and then it's my work time. And then I make myself read or play a game or something before I go to bed, because otherwise my mind will be too focused on my creative work and I won't be able to sleep. I won't be able to sleep if I skip my 30 minutes of reading time, and like, it's too late. I've stayed up too late. I got to go to bed. Mm-hmm. If I skip that 30 minutes of reading time, I'll be up an extra hour and a half in bed. Just like torture. My mind will torture me with ideas. And it's almost like being assaulted by demons, because I just can't stop thinking about things. So I have to have that. I have to have those transitions. But yeah, if I don't have that schedule, I'm lost, man. I just don't know what I'm doing. If I skip one part of that, I feel off.
Yeah. I think it's worth saying that Bob or Robert E. Howard did not kill himself because of that, though. Robert E. Howard killed himself because his mother died, and he had a really, really strong attachment to her, and he just had nothing, as far as he was concerned, worth living for after she died. He didn't die because he was the unconstrained vision. He was a real hard worker, a workhorse. He probably had
I think he fell to despair and just didn't have anything else that was really worth doing it for. At least that's how he felt at the time.
Yeah, his mother was really important to him.
So I could totally see that. It's a big deal when someone dies. My dad died very suddenly, and it was a very it just unseats everything that you do. It completely upends things when people die unexpectedly. Even a parent. And I was probably, how old was I? I think I was 27 when my dad died. So not too far off from Robert E. Howard's age. Yeah. So I understand that.
Yeah.
My dad was like my best friend.
Really?
We had a business together. We went hunting all the time. It was really bad. So I could see that. What are your thoughts on the visual styles of Alex Raymond and Dave Stevens?
I don't know him again.
I don't know him off the top of my head. Alex Raymond. We don't have a ton of time to look at that, though. So let's go ahead and move on, because otherwise we'll be looking at art all day. I bought a copy of the Extravaganza and had it shipped to my girlfriend. This was back at this time in December, but Amazon took until just a few days ago to get it to her. Oh, the Christmas Spectacular. Well, thank you for buying that, Jack. I appreciate that.
I love it. It's great.
I've gotten a couple messages from people that are like, Amazon canceled my order. I'm like, well, I unpublished it at the beginning of January. It was Christmas only. I felt really bad. I guess I could have left it up longer and made a little bit more money, but that's kind of the fun of this, is that it's a Christmas time only product. And we'll do another one I think next Christmas we should do one. We should do like a big Christmas variety one, and I'll get you and I'll get some other writers, and we'll come up with some kind of big giant Christmas book for people, full of crazy fiction. Just put a bunch of books in it.
Story. There should be a story that's seasonal.
Yeah, or maybe make it like a charity project or something. We're starting to worry that it just hadn't shipped. If it takes, I don't know everything about Amazon's system. Sometimes it takes longer to do it. I'm just glad I don't have to put things in boxes and ship them. If you had to wait for me to put things in boxes and ship them, you'd be waiting. It's hard for me to get down to the mailbox.
That's another thing about productivity, David. You make other people do jobs for you that don't waste your time.
Yeah. Off topic, but I managed to purchase your Fantasy Christmas Spectacular book. It's now the biggest book on my shelf. Loving it so far. Thank you for buying that. I appreciate that. Yeah, I wanted to make it's the biggest possible size you can make through or Ingram Spark or whatever Amazon does theirs through. And it's the biggest size. So I went with the biggest size so I could keep it the fewest number of pages and have all those books in it.
It's actually quite readable. There's not really any difficulty. I enjoy reading from it.
Yeah. Hardwick, is it just me, or does the level of anatomical detail in Frank Frazetta's line drawings often border on grotesque?
Yeah, I can see that. Frank's got this sort of dark element that I've never let this factor. This is an exclusive to NewPub Talk here. There are things that Frank does that are incorrect anatomically, and it's because he works as an expressionist of the composition. He said in the different letters and different things that he doesn't care if it doesn't make sense in the body, as long as it fills in the composition. So he's going to twist things and turn things. And take that one of Conan there. Your mouse is right beside it, just below, down below.
Oh,
that
yeah,
one.
This is a great one. Now let's take a look at this.
Look at the hand grip that he's got on the axe. No one would ever swing an axe with that grip. You see, he's underhanded it.
Yeah.
It's bizarre, right?
Yeah, it actually rather is.
It's bizarre. So he does these kinds of things sometimes. Now, Frank gets away with it because he's got so much dynamism in his paintings. It's basically
it's mostly about the gesture.
Yeah, it's like expressionism almost. His paintings in the backgrounds are abstract, and that's why he's so dynamic. He's got these compositional lines that go all over the place, and he uses whatever it takes to make that composition fit. And sometimes it torques the anatomy. That's definitely true.
Yeah. Well, what I like so I made this point to someone at some point, I guess in a chat. The modern and postmodern departed from this tradition that came out of the 19th century. But most of the popular art that people think of as art, it continued that tradition. And I say Frank Frazetta is really, he's really a continuation of the post-romantic expression, intense style, but just transplanted into 20th century fantasy and things like that. So it's really like you have two different traditions. One, which is the more popular kind of art that really developed into most of the art that people actually consume, and then this more academic, modern and postmodern approach to art, where you have something like cubism, or you get to postmodern kind of like Jackson Pollock stuff, where you're just like throwing paint.
Expressionism, yeah.
And if you like, if you get something out of a abstract expressionist painting, that's for you. But most of the art that people actually experience is not, or remember, is not in that style. It's a continuation of the post-romantic. It's a continuation of that late 19th century style. And if we were to go back and if we were to look at, in fact,
Caspar David Friedrich, exactly what I was going to say. I said, look up Friedrich. That's what I was going to say.
The color, look at this. We're going to have the same, the same colors, right? And that same dynamic expression. And the same sense of negative space and nothingness beyond.
Frank's just painting barbarians. It's the same thing.
It's Friedrich, but barbarians. I love his putting a couple figures. Yeah. And then like this almost amorphous landscapes he did. I got to see one of his paintings at the Getty a few years back called A Walk at Dusk, and I wrote a book that was inspired by it, and I'll probably come out with it this year.
Really?
That actually takes place in it actually takes place in southern Arkansas, but not rather than Germany. But it was inspired by that because it reminded me so much of the piney woods, these weird kind of half-rotten woods that just stretch over East Texas and Arkansas and Missouri. It's a really strange thing, like just something like that. Yeah. How fantastical is that?
It's awesome.
It's awesome. I love his paintings so much.
Show that one with the iceberg. That's an incredible one too. Just up a bit. It's on the left.
The icebergs. Yes. The Sea of Ice. This is a very famous painting.
Yeah.
So this painting is just brilliant with the work, and it's paintings of an object, right? But you can just sit there and stare at it and see so many details and so much expression. I also love his self-portrait. It's quite.
Yeah. It's pretty neat.
It's quite striking the way he draws himself.
A very serious.
Because your self-portrait is how you view yourself, and he views himself as a very serious artist.
Yeah.
So I think of that too. It's just an extension of the 19th century. I know we're kind of far afield of Elric and Conan at this point, but
that's true.
It's okay because I love it. Let's keep going. Do you think that the state of mind, as far as anatomical detail, it's almost like he peels the skin. Frazetta will peel the skin off. That's what bodybuilders try to do. They try to get their skin so thin it's like an anatomical drawing of just the muscle. It's grotesque. Do you think that the state of mind you described in which artists depend on feeling inspiration is what inspired the concept of the muse? Possibly. Yeah. But you have to be able to work even if the muse is not talking to you. Or really how to call up the muse. Hello? Can I have you tell me what to do? Jared says he has a schedule. That's good. Let's see here. I actually have 2 copies now. 2 copies of the Christmas Spectacular. Well, thank you for buying that twice. Got 2 when you thought Amazon screwed up the shipment. Okay. Talking about Christmas stories, have you ever read Frederick Forsyth's novella The Shepherd? I have not. Have you?
No.
Nope.
Sounds good though.
Keith Parkinson is also one of the great examples of the continuation of traditional art and fantasy. Great compositions and general eye for beauty. True. You know who else? This is going to sound weird, but Ken Kelly.
Ken Kelly, yeah. He was trained by Frank.
And Ken Kelly he's the guy he does like Man of War's covers. He did covers for Kiss, for Rainbow. He does all of these metal album covers that have that same approach.
He did Rising, didn't he?
He did Rainbow Rising, yeah. One of my very favorite albums ever.
Yeah, totally.
Do you guys think that effect trumps realism? Now that's a question from Jack Cool. Do you think effect trumps realism?
Yes, sometimes. I think that if it is too far away from realism, though, it's hard for you to access it sometimes. I don't mean all the time, but say, for instance, you're dealing with something that has no referent to anything that you can understand. And what was the word he used? Effect?
Effect. Yeah.
Yeah. It may have a lot of effect, but if it's unreadable, you basically kind of truncated yourself so that the audience is not able to access what your point is. And it kind of gets to that kind of postmodern idea of, the author is dead and that you create authorship by reading it yourself and by examining it yourself. And I'm against that. So I think that effect has to go hand in hand with realism. I think hyper-realism, devoid of effect, is also a dead end. It's kind of back to like Elric's Law and Chaos, isn't it?
Yeah. I think you have to have both. Like the whole point of painting something is that there's some element of expression in it. Otherwise, you can just have a photograph. Like, what would be the point of painting after the 1850s when you have photographs?
It'll be better, it'll be faster, and it will do it more effectively than you could ever do it. So just take a photo if that's what you're going to do. Yeah,
it's to me, it's about creating the expression. And just to go back to this great little self-portrait of Caspar David Friedrich. This is not, you couldn't photograph this guy looking this way.
No.
You couldn't. There's extra things in it that wouldn't show up in a photograph. The lighting on his clothes, the versus the higher contrast on his face, the kind of lack of detail around the outside of his head, the no background.
And outside of specifics, when you sit a portrait like that, and it's a self-portrait, so this is even more so, it's the impression that the artist takes over several iterations of a sitting. So there's no single sitting where you paint a painting like that. You sit them again and again and again.
Yeah, because you don't paint this in 2 minutes.
No way.
This is days worth of work to like come up with this.
An interesting examination of who this person is on the inside as well. That's because it's iterated over several sittings.
Yeah. There's another artist that I will point some of you guys to. His name is Howard Lyon. He does a lot of fantasy art. And he does a lot of religious art as well. He's a classically trained painter, and he actually does workshops for classical style painting. And he's really fantastic, and he will also show all of his methods when he does like those time-lapse YouTube videos where you see him painting something over time. He always iterates a painting at least 2 times. So he'll do a sketch, which a lot of painters start with a sketch, like what am I want to draw? Where's it going to look like? And then he does 1 or 2 color studies that are lower detail, but it is the painting, just to get a sense of what he's trying to do. And then he does a final version of it. So he sometimes does 4 iterations of the same picture, and you can see, if you see all 3 of them go together, you'll see that like with each iteration, the details that are important start to take extra prominence. It's very subtle, but maybe it's the shine on the eyes becomes something more important. The color of the eyes will change just a little bit, and all of a sudden they have a deeper feeling to them. And he's done this with pictures. He'll paint a painting of Christ, for example, and you'll see it take on really a very emotional aspect by the time you get to that 3rd one. But it's very technical too. So how there's always this balance of like the emotion and the technical, is that as you do that iteration, you bring more of your emotional feeling into the technical aspects of the painting. Like, man, his eyes need to be bluer, maybe. I don't know. Whatever it's going to be. The Shepherd is about a British fighter pilot in the early 50s going back home from Germany on Christmas night. He suffers failures on his plane and is helped by an old mosquito.
David, did you see the work that they did on the Ghent altarpiece, turning that sheep?
No.
Have you seen that? Oh,
what is this?
Okay, so there's this lamb in the Ghent altarpiece, and it's been worked on, and they think that they've restored it. Just Ghent altarpiece. Look that up. You're going to be twisted. The new sheep face is something you're never going to believe. It's Jan
Oh,
van Eyck.
weird.
That's the new one.
Yeah. That's,
That's the old one, and that's the new one.
what am I looking at?
They fixed it. That's what they figure, that it's fixed now. Yeah, nailed it.
What am I looking at?
Nailed it, right?
Oh, this looks like a demon. What's the story here?
Well, I guess Jan van Eyck painted this, and it was deteriorating, and they decided that they were going to clean it up, and they've been working at it with sort of what's that light called that you can see under the paint?
Ultraviolet light, or
Ultraviolet light, yeah. And they decided that this is what the face was like underneath it, and that someone some years later had painted a naturalistic sheep face over top of this face. So they took those little chips off. As you can see, the old one's quite chipped.
yeah.
And they restored it to this. What do you think?
I don't know what to think about this. This is really bizarre. This is quite bizarre. Maybe that's what he intended. Maybe he drew this and was like, this is dumb, and painted over it.
I don't know. I think it's bizarre, and like you can see that Jan van Eyck is a really like accomplished painter. Like sheep's eyes are not on the front of their face. Like what is that?
Yeah, this looks almost like an alien.
Yeah, I don't know. I wondered, because the lamb is supposed to be God. Is it supposed to be semi-human? Is that the idea?
Maybe.
Why about moving the ears down?
Yeah, why did the ears go down?
And they turned into Shrek's ears, you know? That's the kind of ear that Shrek has. This sort of tube.
It's bizarre. Better than that lady who painted over, who like, remember this? It was this in Spain.
That's the worst. That's the worst.
She like painted over it to try to cover it up, and was like, oh man.
Oh no, it looks like a child did it. That was the worst one. I don't know who did that one.
That one was bad. Oh, I agree. I miss some. Here's a good question. Opinion on how to adapt Elric to the cinema or TV.
Oh yeah, you know, David, I've thought about this so many times. This is your question, though. I want to hear what you say.
Honestly, so it's hard to know because there's so much interesting stuff, and especially if you look at the comics, like the Dreaming City comics that Michael Moorcock wrote, are really cool.
Those were by First Publishing, weren't they?
Yeah. Now I don't have the copies; I just have the scripts. So I haven't seen the actual comics in quite a while. I think I could probably get PDFs of them to look at them again.
They're good.
They're really good.
Did the art?
Who did it?
I think his name was Jan Doorsma.
I'll have to look at him again. So, like, how do I approach that? I mean, how do you really approach that? Well, I think it's pretty easy to adapt that first book as far as the order of things goes. I think the problem with adapting Elric is that the imagery is so bizarre. I don't know how you do it. So, like, at the end of Elric of Melniboné, they find the swords inside of some sort of living cave with like sphincter doors that close. Like, how would you film this? This would be you'd have to use some really extreme effect knowledge in order to do it.
Do you know who Wendy Penny is?
Who?
Wendy Penny?
I don't think so.
She did a comic called ElfQuest, but she adapted Elric into an animated thing as her university project in the 70s. And she did an animation of Elric, and she chose to do the ending, the story called Stormbringer.
The Stormbringer, yeah.
Yeah.
Stormbringer is really good. I mean, it's a great ending. I'd probably start with the first book because I think it's a great epic fantasy setting. It'd really get people on Elric's side. I might, Fortress of the Pearl is also good. I might be tempted to skip or just, if you had, it depends. If you're going to do movies or a series. If you're going to do a series, a lot of those Elric stories can just transfer right into a 1 or 2 hour episode of TV. I think the problem is trying to execute the imagery correctly.
Yeah, that would be hard. I mean,
that city of thieves.
Yeah.
How would you shoot that?
Natsulker, the City of Thieves. That was crazy. You know, that's got one of the best parts in it where they're fighting that monster and it's calling itself Pig or Thing. It keeps saying its name Thing.
Oh
Thing.
yeah.
And then Elric kills it and it goes, Frank. I thought that.
Oh yeah. No, that's in the first book, isn't it?
I can't remember where it is.
Okay, it's him and who's he doing? Was it Moonglum that he's with?
It must be Moonglum. I can't remember, but they kill this monster and it's a blobby shit. It's like
they're in this weird world of the world of chaos, and so when they're there, they get attacked by these pig things, and the pig things, they fight him down, and it's like, am I Pig or Thing? And then he kills him, and he says, I'm Frank.
That's all it says as it dies.
Frank. It's it, and that to me is they're just people. They're people from like our world that are somehow trapped in this chaos realm.
It killed me when I read that, man. It killed me.
It'd be such bizarre things. I think I'd love to see it. I think it's been optioned a number of times. I keep seeing articles about like it's in development. In development means they hired someone to come up with a story treatment for it, and then they didn't move ahead. These studios will option and re-option stories over and over again, almost as a spoiler. So they will option a story just to keep another studio from doing that story, just in case they want to. So and the way that they option is they pay money, and it's usually a pretty trivial sum. So maybe they pay Michael Moorcock, $10,000 to option some part of the Elric story. And then if they don't make the movie, if they don't do anything with it after a certain number of years, he can sell that to someone else. So they really just pay for the option of making it or not making it.
You mean they buy it and they just don't do anything with it?
Yeah, on purpose. So this was a weird thing. So I don't know did you ever read Wheel of Time? I know lots of people in the chat have read Wheel of Time.
I read the first part. I didn't read the whole thing.
So Wheel of Time has been through this as well. It gets optioned and re-optioned. So they make an option, and then their option is going to expire. So what happens is they haven't made anything out of it, then they lose the rights to it and someone else can buy the rights. So somebody made a single episode of Wheel of Time. There's a single TV episode out there that was put on it as a pilot at like midnight somewhere.
Oh.
Just so that they fulfilled the terms of the option, and so they can have another 6 or 8 years to make Wheel of Time if they want to, or to sell the rights to another studio that wants to do it. So this is the way that the business works in Hollywood: is they will buy scripts and they'll buy options for making movies out of different things and just hold on to them.
Really?
Yeah, they'll just hold on to them and not make anything with them. So Elric's been in production for 20 years, but nothing's ever come out of it. I don't know.
Is The Witcher anything to do with Elric? Does he look like Elric?
That's it. Yeah, so he kind of looks like Elric. I don't think the characters are remotely alike. People who think that they're alike, I mean, you can watch it for yourself.
What is The Witcher?
So it was originally some fantasy novels written by a Polish author whose name I'm going to have trouble pronouncing, but it's like Andrzej. What's his last name? I can't pronounce it. Okay. I'm bad at Polish pronunciation. You guys will have to forgive me if you're from Poland. So he wrote these fantasy novels. They're very fairy tale inspired. They're not bad stories or anything, about this character who's a professional monster hunter, and he's kind of mutant. He's taken mutagens that have altered significantly his physical appearance. His hair's turned white. He has like vertical pupil things going on in the games, at least. So he kind of, and then some of the characters call him the White Wolf. Now, people say, oh, well, that's it. He stole Elric because they call Elric the White Wolf. Robert E. Howard is the first person to create a character called the White Wolf.
Yeah.
So you can look up a Robert E. Howard story called The White Wolf. The White Wolf is actually an Arabian character, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just a very common idea, you know? Like, you can go right back to Jack London, White Fang. It's about a white wolf. I mean, it's just wolves are very interesting, and a white wolf's even more cool. Yeah, I think that's cool.
So I think they both have white hair, and that's it.
That's it. Okay.
They don't physically, Geralt of Rivia is physically robust. He's he does have some sorcerer's powers, but they're nothing like what Elric does, where he's praying to gods to get some water elementals to come save him or something.
I love how Elric works magic. It's basically elemental magic most.
Yeah, and he has to like beseech the spirits, and make a deal with them. It's kind of shamanistic. I really like it, and it also fulfills the idea of magic being chaotic and unreliable, and just something very otherworldly rather than something systematized, a second science like what Brandon Sanderson would do. I kind of like the more chaotic magic. Makes sense in Elric's world for sure.
The ship that sails over land and sea. Remember that?
And although everything gets like jumps out of its way.
Amazing. That was incarnated by Grom, the god of Earth. You could sail the ship right across the land. That was awesome.
I love that. But the people on the land side are angry that it's been like stolen, and so they keep trying to get Elric. It's great. It's awesome. Yeah, if I were going to adapt it, first of all, you need a really good actor. So I'm sure there's plenty of Hollywood actors who are willing to have long white hair and are very skinny.
Yeah. Jared Leto or somebody.
Jared Leto actually might be a good choice for that. He's he's got that kind of almost emaciated look.
Yeah, he's edgy too.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if anyone else is coming to mind, but I'm sure there's plenty of people that could pull it off, and pull it off really, really well. And from there, how many actors would jump at the opportunity to not work out for their character?
Yeah, kidding.
It's like you don't have to. It's like you don't have to jump on a steroid cycle to be huge for this role. What? I can just be skinny like I normally am. Sweet. So yeah, let's start with that. If it was a series, then you can just adapt individual stories. That first one could be like a good little 6-part miniseries, and then you could do all of the individual stories. Fortress of the Pearl, I think, would be an amazing movie. It just has a great structure, flow, super fantastical. I love the conclusion of it. Yeah.
The Knight of the Pearl, man, he would be cool.
Oh yeah, and I love the result of it too. There's a Vampire Hunter D novel that basically has the same kind of setup and resolution, but on the other side, where it rather than it turns out that they're caught in a dream and they're all creations of the dream rather than they're actively going into the dream. They unexpectedly get trapped in it. So he kind of does a little iteration of that, which is kind of interesting.
That's a cool class for Dungeons and Dragons. The Dream Thief. Remember that character?
Yes.
What a
the Dream Thief.
Only Moorcock can come up with things like that.
Yeah, and it's great. And he actually retrieves I don't want spoilers. Yeah. Retrieves the pearl. So the imaginary becomes real, and that's something else with Moorcock as well. And it's something in my books too. Is the imaginary and the real are the same once you go past the realm of the mundane.
Yeah, that's awesome. You got to remind me after we're offline to the spoilers and go, why did she retreat back there? I can't remember what the reason was. The princess.
Oh.
Was she abused or something, or why did she go back?
In which one? Fortress of the Pearl?
Yeah, what made her go into the dream?
I'm trying to remember what. It's because they all believed she had the pearl. And she never had it.
Oh, because it doesn't.
She had it only in her mind, but they still retrieved it.
Yeah,
Wild. That's great.
And she just went into kind of a coma, right? Just laying there.
Mm-hmm.
That was awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. Hey, we're starting to run out of time. We've gone 2 hours, which is an hour longer than I intended to go.
Okay, we got 6 minutes here.
All right. So I think that's probably it. Anything that you want to plug before we start to go?
I'm not working on anything that's coming out for a while yet, so maybe you can just check me out on Twitter. I always put new art out on that. I'm at Jess White Comic. You can see I always do updates on what I'm working on. I happen to be working on a heavy metal cover right now, but I don't have anything ready to show you for that. It's just sketch level right now, but it's going to be a traditional metal band from Seattle. Good music. I like it. So look for that. Going to come out in vinyl. I'm going to buy it, David.
Yeah, vinyl. I know you and me both like to collect vinyls. There's something about hearing it on the analog medium. I've talked about this before. They do sound better,
It does.
And I've compared the same recordings on the same system. It's like you hear the vinyl, it's like there's something else to it. There's something extra to it.
My painting big size on a record cover. Wouldn't that be great? Rather than a CD.
Oh, a $10 super chat. Thank you. Blessings to you, David, by Determined Sheepy. Thank you. Here's to a full belly for you and your family. Please continue in your fantastic writing. I will do my very best. And I really want to come out with this productivity book because I think it's going to help a lot of people. And I have to decide how much I actually want to charge for it. It's like I almost want to give it away. Because I don't like people having to pay money to know how to do things.
It's a little bit like a scam, you know. It sounds like, you know, abs in 5 minutes if you have to pay for this.
Yeah, and the message of it is the opposite, which is like,
just grind.
Yeah, it's just you grind it out, and then you turn around and people are like, well, you've written. Someone got the Christmas special and was like, I was looking at this, I realized this guy's put out a lot of work. I'm like, it doesn't feel like it. It's just you look backwards at the steps you've done, and you're like, I've done a lot of work.
You know, you better put this quote from Harold in it, or at least reference it, or you can say it right now about how many hours you've got to sleep. It's one of my favorite things.
Yeah. It's like, what is it? You have 6 hours to sleep, you have 18 hours to work. And I know what you're saying. Arnold, I need 9 hours of sleep. Well, to you I say sleep faster, I recommend.
Sleep faster.
Because there's a lot that you can get done if you have 18 hours to work and 6 hours to sleep.
Yeah.
So that's I don't try to cut the sleep too short. I think sleep's important for health and other things like that. But I do have that farmer mentality, which is like sometimes things got to get done, and that means sometimes you don't sleep a lot.
Yeah.
Anybody who's not willing to sacrifice a couple nights of sleep to achieve their goals, there's going to be a million other things you don't sacrifice. You're like, you know what? I really just want to take my whole lunch hour to goof off.
Yeah.
You know, whereas when I worked full time, you know, me and Matt used to commute. We recorded a podcast on the way to work, and then we had those union breaks a couple times a day. Pop out the computer and write a couple words. Spend 5 minutes eating, 30 minutes working.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. So anything else before we say goodbye?
Read Howard.
Yeah, read Robert E. Howard. Happy birthday to Robert E. Howard. So my recommendation right now for if you want a good place to start, it's with these Ballantine books. I don't have the Conan one. I don't know where I put it. I was reading it. So there's one. It's called the Coming. You have it? It's called The Coming of Conan, or Conan the Cimmerian.
I've got this one.
This is good.
Yeah.
This is a good one too.
This is produced by whom? Orion Books out of the UK. It's Howard without the edit, so he spells things like scimitar and he forgets the C, so you get to see spelling errors and stuff.
Yeah, and that's what I like about this one too. It's unedited, so you can buy after you read you want to start as a Howard purist and then move on. That's my opinion. Yeah, then you can read some of the Sprague de Camp stuff. Who else did? Lynn Carter did some.
Lynn Carter, definitely. Robert Jordan did Conan for a while.
Yeah, Robert Jordan wrote Conan the Destroyer. And I heard he wrote it over his spring break. He wrote it in a week.
Leonard Carpenter wrote some Conan. Yeah, lots of people have written Conan. But also Marvel. Marvel does a great job with Conan. I mean, there's some silliness, but I think Roy Thomas really serves the character well. He'll never be forgotten.
Yeah. So then from once you read the Robert E. Howard original stuff, so the Ballantine series, the first one's called like Conan the Cimmerian, and they're printed in the order of publication. So the first one starts with Conan as king, because it's adapted from a cool story called By This Axe I Rule.
Yeah, and they called it the Phoenix on the Sword for Conan.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the Phoenix on the Sword. And so read them in that way, and you will get a great sense of Conan. And then from there, you can go out of that. Don't worry about internal chronologies. That's not what it's about. Each adventure is its own adventure with its own fun things. Don't worry about the chronologies at all. None of that really matters.
It doesn't matter at all. In fact, it actually is more charming the other way. Howard envisioned it like as if it was a person sitting around a campfire recounting a life of adventure. You wouldn't start, well, I was born on the 9th of 3rd. He didn't do that. He just said, I remember this time I did this. And then he would act when he was 20. Oh, yeah, there was this.
The only introduction you have to Conan from the first story is from the From the time when the oceans drank Atlantis to the coming of the sons of Ares,
Yeah.
that was a time undreamed of. Into this, Conan, destined to wear the crown of all Aquilonia upon a troubled brow.
It's wonderful. Yeah, yeah.
Actually, I think that last part is just from the movie, but it's just that. That's the quote. And then the story begins. And it's just perfect. It just sets the mood. And that's what it is. It's just about the adventures of Conan. Don't worry about chronologies at all. Just enjoy the stories. Now, for Elric, I have a different recommendation. So my recommendation for Elric is to read the chronological series. And my recommendation is going to be that you start with Elric of Melniboné. I don't have a copy handy. It's got that great classic Michael Whalen cover.
How about this one, which is the omnibus?
Yes. So this one... So I'm going to make an alteration. That one has all of them. They've been kind of ordered over the years. There's, let me see if I can remember the order off the top of my head. It's Elric of Melniboné, Sailor on the Seas of Fate.
Yep.
The Weird of the White Wolf, The Vanishing Tower, Bane of the Black Sword, and Stormbringer. Did I forget one?
Yeah, I'm just looking here. I think you probably got him there. I don't have a list here in front of me.
So I'm going to make an alteration, which is after the first book, but before you read Sailor on the Seas of Fate, you got to read Fortress of the Pearl.
Stick in Fortress of the Pearl, yeah.
So Fortress of the Pearl is Michael Moorcock went back and wrote these interquels. One is called Fortress of the Pearl. The other one's called, what is it called? The Dreaming Rose?
There's one called The Dream Thief's Daughter. There's one called The Son of the White Wolf. The one is The Dream Thief's Daughter. There's another one. It's called something about the Rose.
Yeah, that one. The name is for some reason skipping me. So that one happens between I think books 4 and 5. So you can read those interquels placed back in their chronological order. But also, I just think that if you read Fortress of the Pearl, you get much more on Elric's side.
Yeah.
You have a much better understanding of him because he does some very almost irredeemable things in the third book, The Weird of the White Wolf.
In this one, you actually get the Fortress of the Pearl, David. This
great.
Saga, it has it here. Elric of Melniboné, The Fortress of the Pearl, Sailor on the Seas of Fate, The Dreaming City, While the Gods Laugh, and The Singing Citadel. So it puts it in this one if you get these omnibus. But they have two. This is the whole story of Elric.
Yeah, so this might be a really good way to access them too. See, I bought all of the old original like Del Rey paperbacks, the Michael Whalen covers. I really like having those. You can find them at used bookstores. I bought them for a couple bucks. I know that they're getting harder to find for some reason, but these ones, these are great. Oh, they're dull. I'm sorry, they're dull.
This is a serious recommendation. Don't start with the Sailor on the Seas of Fate because that's what I did, and I just was like, "What's going on?"
It won't make any sense, and because it has that story of him and Eric and who else is in it? Coram, yeah, and I think Hawkman is in it too, isn't he?
I can't recall that, but
so it's got all his guys in it.
Yeah,
that won't make any sense if you don't have all the other Moorcock.
And I said I really wanted to like Elric, but I was like, I don't have any idea what's going on in this, and it was weird.
So yeah, read Elric of Melniboné first, and once you're done with that, the comics I think are great. After that, you can read some of the crazier stuff like Dream Thief's Daughter. He had like a trilogy that's him like in Nazi Germany or something. I never read it. I'll get around to it, I'm sure at some point, but everyone was like, don't read it. There's Elric at the End of Time. But the comics are really good. So there's a whole comic series. I'm not sure when they came out. I think the 80s.
They were in the 80s, and they're pretty decent. First Comics put them out.
Okay. So those are good. Then check those out. But definitely read Fortress of the Pearl after you read the first one. And then you'll forgive more of Book 2 and Book 3 before you get onto the Vanishing Tower. Vanishing Tower is really good, too.
Yeah, and this is a good story, too. You can find get these. These two Conans from the 70s. They're pretty expensive, but it's a pretty good story, and Michael Moorcock wrote it, so it'd be kind of a non-canon story of Elric. Yeah,
and it kind of fits with Moorcock's idea of a multiverse. There's no rule that Elric couldn't meet Conan on whatever Conan's plane of existence is.
Yeah,
that's what's kind of cool about it to me. So, anyway, thanks so much for joining me, Jesse, and we'll see you guys next time. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching this after the fact. And hop on my mailing list, dvspress.com/list. You can find Jesse on Twitter at Jesse as Jesse White Comic, all one word, and stay up to date with his drawings and his projects. And we should have some cool stuff coming out this year. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So thanks so much, and we'll see you guys next time. And thank you for all the chats. I do appreciate it.